Hello everybody and welcome to this special episode of On Brand. We're here today to celebrate International Women's Day, bringing together some of the wave makers, change makers and leaders from across our industry to talk about how we can drive positive change through diversity, inclusion and gender balance. In this session, we're going to be talking about shifting stereotypes with a new value system. This year's campaign theme for International Women's Day is all about each for equal, celebrating individuality and diversity, which is both better for business and better for the world. But there are still challenges when it comes to the negative impact of unconscious bias and stereotyping in the workplace. Fawcett Society recently published some research where 7 in 10 women aged 18 to 34 affected by stereotypes claimed their career choices were restricted, while Cambridge study in 2019 showed that 75% of UK female employees said that workplace culture hindered their promotion, while 42% of men agreed. So I'm joined today by a stellar panel of guests to explore this a little bit more, sharing some personal experience of how to shift that balance in a traditionally stereotyped world and how living these values should be delivered in everything that we do. I'm Sabrina Rodriguez. I'm Global Head of Digital Marketing at Dentsu Aegis Network, and I'll hand over to our panel of guests to introduce themselves. Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Boakye. I'm Regional Vice President of Customer Success at Pubmatic. Been there now coming up to 6 years. And been in the industry over 20, so yeah.
Hi, Nina Preston-Smith, Brand and Communications Director for Ascential. That remit includes corporate responsibility, diversity and inclusion, so very happy to be here.
Great, thank you.
I'm Claire Blunt. I'm the Chief Financial Operating and Data Officer for Hearst Europe. We're a publishing company, very women-orientated, female-oriented. I don't hail from the publishing industry. I have a background in retail. I'm a qualified barrister and accountant, predominantly male environments. So being in a business where there's almost 80% women is absolutely wonderful.
Very jealous.
Nice. Hi, I'm Toccara Baker, and I work and lead product marketing for Adobe's advertising cloud product. And I'm really happy to discuss this topic today.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sparing your time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experiences and what you guys are doing in that space. I mean, Claire, the stats show that stereotyping is a real issue. And I'm interested to hear whether you see that being reflected in your industry and what you have done to kind of address some of those challenges ingrained in our system when it comes to stereotyping.
So I think it's stereotyping and it's stereotyping and bias and self-deselection. And I say that as an example of thinking about what we have done at Hearst to address the gender pay gap. In regard to our gender pay gap, we have less than 3.1% gender pay gap in 98.5% of our population. So absolutely we have an issue in 1.5% of our population, but predominantly we don't have an issue. We're confident we have equal pay, which is the key criteria. But part of the reason why there starts to be a bit of a gender pay gap is around female deselection. And one of the things that I noticed throughout my career is that when you are discussing with your female team members their performance appraisal, they are reticent at best to discuss pay. So one of the things that we introduced onto our annual appraisal forms in Hearst is a little tick box, and that tick box needs ticking if you have discussed pay with your line manager. Not potentially asked for a pay rise, not told them that you're really unhappy with so-and-so's pay, but actually you have had the opportunity to discuss pay. And what that has done is taken away that stereotype, that bias, that female deselection of being grateful to have a job and actually being more confident to be able to have a discussion about your pay. And that's been game-changing.
And is there anything else we can do around increasing that confidence? Because obviously having that as a part of a process, I suppose, in your appraisal is one thing, but actually talking about it and asking potentially for more money is still quite a big step.
Yes, I think it is. And one of the things that we have been doing is female mentoring. That's because we, again, are lucky not only to have almost 80% of our population being female, but in our senior leadership teams, we have at least 50% of our senior leadership teams and our executive teams made up of at least 50% of women. And so we put our people out, we put our female leaders out, and certainly this morning, as an example, in our Hearst offices, we are having speed mentoring sessions where people can sign up, not to speak to me this year, they did last year, but I'm here this year, but this year they can speak to a number of our senior leaders across the business who are female. You can talk to them if you're a man as well. It's not an exclusion zone of gentlemen, but you then can ask any question. And in that way, I think sharing our experiences and giving back in that way has been really, again, very, very sort of changing, fundamentally changing for our next female leaders.
That's fantastic. And Jackie, obviously you work in a tech industry, which is traditionally quite male dominated.
Yep.
Firstly, do you also find that is an issue with women working in your industry around asking for that step up in terms of promotion and pay?
I think, yes, I agree with that point. I think we are always kind of reticent to kind of get to that point. But I do think, and something that Pubmatic's done well is actually they review annually what the pay gap is. And, you know, to your surprise, you might get someone come up and say, actually, we've given you the gap of money and we're giving it back. So it's something that the company's conscious of doing. And I think that's something that the HR team are doing well. I think in terms of male dominance a little bit, in terms of when ad tech came around, I think actually what it did, it gave AdOps gave women a chance who were quite techie, quite geeky to kind of come in. So I think if I look back over my career, I came in through AdOps, and you know I have a BIT. I've got a master's in BIT, so it was nice to kind of come through that way and be technical, but work with other peers, other women that also came through that similar journey. And actually now, when I look at our current business, you see a lot of women, especially on our team today, that I'll say it's more than 50% that are actually kind of doing those kind of operational but actually technical roles. So technical account managers, and then also being able to have that kind of connection with clients as well. So it's, I think there's been a nice change.
Good.
Which has been nice to see.
That's great. And we just had a panel actually on early careers and how to bring in more diverse talent and build that talent pool right from the start, I suppose, of their career. Has Pubmatic been quite active in that space as well, from a kind of STEM or tech point of view as well? Or?
I have to say, Pubmatic was a company I chose to want to work with. And I think the reason I reached out to them is actually, it was the first time when I saw that they had a black president. And that actually really inspired me, actually. And I was like, that you don't see many black presidents kind of, forefront of a business. And I was like, I had my second child, and I was like, coming back into the industry, where do I want to work? And I started to kind of look at different companies, and this Pubmatic stood out to me. It was a nice fit in terms of my skill set and my role, and I joined it, and it's been probably one of the best companies I've worked for, just because of that diversity and inclusion that we have today. I almost kid, it's almost like the UN. We've got multiple languages, we've got multiple races, different religions, and it is really nice. And you really, can really kind of really grow within that kind of environment.
Just to add to that, I think what's been interesting about the gender pay legislation and obligation to report is that it's certainly in our company, and I think in many, many other companies, is it's forced a conversation, not just around gender, but around all of those other underrepresented groups.
Yes.
I think for us at Ascential, what we've done is we're almost using that gender pay gap and using our focus on women as a blueprint for how we're going to work with other underrepresented groups, and not just at a policy-making level, but really trying to get that grassroots, getting people doing stuff, thinking about it, starting the conversations, starting network groups. From my experience, that stuff really only works if it comes from the bottom, which means people need to feel that it's an environment where that stuff is needed, respected, and we're on that journey, and it's exciting to see it move. But the legislation, I think, has has really kick-started that, imperfect though it is.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think something interesting that you touched on, Jackie, was the importance of role modelling as well. I think that's incredibly important when it comes to attracting talent as well as keeping talent. Toccara, you obviously work in the communications industry. How are you guys kind of looking at how you use your public-facing comms and marketing to help shift that change in perception, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that we really focus on at Adobe, and specifically for myself. It's really understanding, do we have all of the varying viewpoints, and are we representing many different people in our stories? So if it kind of seems like one group, then let's ensure that we are bringing, someone that's a woman, someone that's disabled, someone from a different, various races, so that we're getting those opinions. And it's just also, I would say, having a hard look in terms of all of the executions and the events that we put together, just about that pool of people that we reach out to, which is really important. And so, sometimes it's very easy to kind of pull the same people that we've worked with before. And in many cases, you can end up with a panel or an event where everybody kind of looks the same, right? And so internally having those conversations, that it's not necessarily that we can't find those people, it's that we just haven't tried hard enough. And so we can pull all of our various contacts and our resources to really force ensuring that there's diverse thinking and diverse representation in our executions.
Yeah, and Claire, obviously working in a publications company, I assume that there's quite a lot that Hearst are doing in this space as well when it comes to how the publications themselves break down stereotypes.
Yes, one of our most recent examples, just over a year ago, we had Tess Holliday on the cover of Cosmopolitan. And for those of you who don't know her, I'm sure everybody does, those of you who don't know, she's a larger lady. And actually we got a lot of feedback, both extremely positive and also negative, but we invite all kinds of feedback because actually that's what makes it a richer environment. So we actually won Cover of the Year for that, the PPA Award Cover of the Year, and we were extremely delighted with that. But it ranges from doing those sorts of things to having events. We run an event annually called Women of the Year. Harper's Bazaar brand run that event. And what we do at that event is essentially celebrate the empowerment of women. And there are phenomenal women everywhere, as we know, but actually giving them a voice is the hard work. It's whether it's sometimes easier to sort of find the more local kind of current successes, but actually if you go looking for them, there are really fascinating female successes all over the place. So we do a variety of things, but we take it extremely seriously because we want to walk the walk and talk the talk. Yeah. We ensure that, you talked about how you need to work a bit harder to get people on panels. We insist on having women on every shortlist for every middle manager and senior manager roles. And that actually means we have to work a bit harder.
Yeah.
But that's okay, and we're ending up with a much better pool of people from which to then bring into our business. So yeah, we do a lot of things.
That's amazing. Do any of you guys kind of have gender equal shortlists in your companies, or is this something that you guys think should be kind of basically standardised across most?
Yeah, I think that as part of our recruitment policies, we do. I think what's interesting for us as a B2B company, so you're talking directly to predominantly female consumers, that's an amazing opportunity. In the B2B space, your influence is slightly different. And what we've seen, so some of our larger brands that hold big events, so Cannes Lions, Money 2020, Retail Week, we've understood that there's an opportunity for us to really start a conversation and make change in our industry. So all three of those brands, of those events, have programs which are there to support women and empower women. Particularly if you look at the fintech, financial services industry, that's a space that really, where that conversation is, even more needed as opposed to maybe the media marketing world. But yeah, I think understanding where your points of influence are as a company is really important, whether it's the content that you're producing or the events that you hold, as well as some of those hygiene factors in terms of using inclusive language in your marketing and making sure that anyone really who's in a customer-facing or marketing role just understand some of the basic do's and don'ts of how you communicate in an inclusive way. And those things are really simple, and they're really simple to explain. But, for those of us that speak that language, that understand it, it's a given. But I think, putting those kinds of processes in place is really, really important. It's hygiene stuff.
Yeah, and I suppose kind of speaking of inclusion, how would you define it? And do you think that there are times when it swings the wrong way, or how are you guys kind of looking at that at Ascential?
Somebody once explained it to me as diversity is about your inputs, so making sure that the makeup and representation is right, and inclusion is almost the output, so the feeling and how people sort of experience the company. And the thing about inclusion is, what are the metrics you use? And that's something we're thinking about at the moment. In our staff survey last year, we included a whole set of new questions which were more around trying to understand whether people felt included, felt part of things. But you really need to do some quite detailed, detailed work to understand that goes beyond a survey, that's more about focus groups. We ran a series of focus groups last year as part of our Women in Leadership work, because those feelings are really complex and nuanced, and they're not easy to understand with just sort of quantitative data. You need to really understand people's lived experiences to understand where your challenges are, and that is an ongoing exercise, and something you need to be thinking about monitoring, and how you get that feedback loop in place. And your employee network groups are a really good way of doing that if you've got those sort of set up and operational. And we've got 1, 2, we're kind of getting there, and I'd like to see more of that. But I think that establishing that two-way feedback loop is really important, because how else do you know?
Absolutely. Toccara, how does Adobe kind of see inclusion?
Yeah, in general, we look at diversity and inclusion. It's not a branding method. It's actually a structural and an organizational change, right? So there are a couple of ways that we look at it. So you need to ensure that we have a diverse set of employees, right? So that's really looking at recruitment methods. That's really ensuring that we're looking at various people, not only people that come from various backgrounds, right? At the same time, having the right people in the room is only as good as them being able to feel comfortable to open their mouths and speak, right? And bring their opinion to the table, and then for everyone else at the table to actually listen to it. And so we have programs in place where we essentially are doing education, but also it's a lot of just support for various affinity groups. And we host something called Adobe for All, where anyone within the company can go, and it requires filling out a form, but also we have a lot of various programs that just talk about the importance of thinking about women in the workplace, or looking at different perspectives. And then feedback is really important, right? Because if we have everyone there and they don't feel comfortable enough to actually provide that feedback and really talk about how we can make it better, then we're kind of missing the boat. So every year we kind of have this survey that we have to fill out, and it's great because it's anonymous. So you can really talk about what you would like the company to change and why, and that feedback is really taken seriously by our HR team. So
yeah, again, it's that two-way, isn't it? Is ensuring you have that dialogue. Claire, what other measures can we take? And is there any legislation we can look at as well when it comes to driving inclusion?
I much like you were referring to the gender pay gap, it's not an ideal legislation. It's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but rather that than nothing. And I hope we do see more legislation, I'm afraid, because there's not enough pace in terms of what's changing. And certainly I think legislation in a number of factors, partly pay legislation, so the London Living Wage has made a difference. I mean, I recognise that for people to come and work in central London is an extremely expensive occupation. And so we tend to find that people coming into our business in the more junior roles are coming from middle-class backgrounds, because they are the ones whose parents can perhaps support them to be funded to go to work. And we need to find all backgrounds being able to sort of access. So I think legislation will prevail. I think in terms of what we're also finding, though, is that employees select in the way that our employees are asking us about our environmental policies. They're also asking about our diversity and inclusion policies or approaches. And we have forums, we have employee forums, certainly we have a diversity and inclusion group, and everybody's welcome, from the senior levels to the junior levels, from any function. And then we get a pool of different thinking, and we need diverse thinking, or you'll end up with the same answers. So I think it's going to be a bit of both. I think employees, it will sort of be demanding a bit more, and if you care about your employees, and we all certainly do, but if you care about your employees, you will make some changes. But legislation does help. We have only got a handful of senior women on FTSE 100 boards, and certainly we only have a handful of women on as chief execs on FTSE 100 boards. And if the legislation hadn't gone to try and make that change, I'm not even sure we'd have had that. So we have got to do more, both sort of with legislation and without.
Yeah, and I know that Dentsu certainly are talent as well as our clients are expecting us to have real clarity on our diversity, our inclusion strategy, our programs, our initiatives. It's absolutely sort of a given now, and it is expected of all of us. Jackie, we've kind of talked a little bit about inclusion and getting people into the business. How important is upward mobility at Pubmatic?
Really important, I think. So it's something that the business has been monitoring, and over the last year, I believe we've kind of 30% more upward mobility in terms of women progressing in the company. We now have a woman speakership kind of series, and it goes out globally. So different women in the business get interviewed. You get to see how they came up through their background and kind of their work experience. And I think that allows us as well globally to be affected by the different ways that people have kind of experienced things through their journey in their careers. So I think, that's been really nice to kind of see and advocate. From the UK perspective, it's nice for me. I'm on the UK leadership team, and to Claire's point, we're making sure that there's that kind of equality there. And I think actually we're probably 60-40 now against men, which is nice. And so it's really nice to kind of see those differentiations over time. I think if I look over the span of my career, there's been a very, I think, onward journey in terms of how we've progressed. There's still a lot more work to be done, but I think especially in the environment that we're in, it's fast pacing. I think we're trying to keep up, and that's good to see.
Yeah, brilliant. Obviously, there's a huge amount that needs to be done still.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear all of your thoughts, really, in terms of where you see our industry in 5 years' time, say. So, Nina, what are your thoughts? What would you like to see in 5 years?
More data. So before I was at Ascential, I was at Channel 4, which is a publicly owned company and part of a very different universe of public service broadcasters, which had, has all sorts of pressure to publish stats, right, on who works at that business. And although, again, these things aren't perfect, and you need to think really carefully about how you gather that data, what you do with it. And I think a lot of companies would probably not choose to publish that information in full unless they felt that they needed to. It really forces the question. And I think to building on the legislation point, legislation is so important because ultimately what it's there to do is help identify problems. But you as your organisation have to understand how you're going to do that yourself. What's the data you need to understand where you've got issues with representation, where you've got issues with culture. You need data to do that, and you need the qualitative data. Yes, we've talked about that, how important that is, but for some people, you need numbers and figures to help them really understand, right? And they are available in this sphere, and I think to get some kind of consistency and a general trend of being really open about numbers and data, and I would love to see.
Yeah. Toccara, what are your thoughts 5 years from now?
Oh man, I totally agree that it'll be more data, more transparency in terms of data. What I also really think will happen, we're starting to see this, is that women are really sharing just their personal information with one another. So a good example is actually within the tech industry, there's a document going around where women can identify what's your title, how long have you been working, what region do you work in, and what's your salary, and what are the benefits that you have. And this is just a form that anyone can fill out, and it turns into an Excel sheet, and it's one big massive pivot table. And it's amazing because, I've shared it with a lot of my friends, and it just provides really interesting transparency into what's happening with women across the globe. And this is something that a woman I think in San Francisco just decided to do, and it's really grown bigger. And so I think there's, companies that, legislation that's being created to force companies to provide more transparency, but women are also taking that control into their own hands. And so I could see that function just being a yearly report that we all can look at. At the same time, I feel like we are moving past the conversations of, how can a woman be successful in the workplace, or can she have it all? But how do we actually support her to have it all? So companies are really exploring, okay, what do we need to do to support working mothers, to even support single women that might necessarily get taken advantage of because people think they have no lives, right? And so I think that companies are realizing, okay, instead of just saying that it's inclusive, or that we are here to help you, we actually need to put some programs and items in place to support you.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Claire, what are your aspirations for 5 years?
So I think, so absolutely legislation, because businesses, of course, have to make a profit. That is why we're here predominantly. And without that legislation, it's quite costly to do some of this stuff. So legislation is one. Data is definitely two. There's two others that I really think I hope to see in 5 years. The third thing for me is technology. We need to have the use of technology really enabling a different way of working. And whether that is a mother who has, I have 3 children, I'm blessed to have 3 children, whether it's being able to manage those children, whether it's able to manage aging parents or, a sick husband, whatever your needs are. It's not always children. We talk about women with children, but there are loads of reasons why people need some help. So technology should be enabling for us to work in different ways. And the fourth thing for me is sisterhood. Because I have grown up in an industry where it felt like there was only space for one woman. And the woman next to me was like, get out my way, love. And actually, what I want is, hey, take my hand, let me help you.
Yeah.
We need more sisterhood.
Yeah.
I don't know why it starts in the playgrounds with being a little unkind, and I see it with my young daughter, but that's where we've got to start. We've got to start by saying, hey, there's space enough for all of us. And actually, if there are only 10 spaces, then maybe we should get rid of some of the men and put some of the women in, rather than there's one space for the women. So sisterhood is the fourth thing for
Love
me.
that.
I like that.
Love that,
That's great.
especially the awkward conversations with the men in power. Jackie, what are your
I think all the ladies have touched on it, but I think the training has to be ongoing as well. Really solid programs. I think we're all talking about it, and I even still don't see enough of the training and knowledge sharing about how we do this. So to get to the data, we really do need to kind of put emphasis on the training.
Yeah.
I think every company needs to be accountable for what they're doing, and us as individuals as well, because we all play a part of that diversity and inclusion. Making sure that there's a nice culture and environment where people can thrive. So, I think it's not just a HR issue; it's a business issue. So, we're all part of that. So we should
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. We've had some questions from the feed. One of the questions, which is I think quite interesting, do men also suffer from stereotyping, and how do we ensure we're being inclusive when it comes to shifting that perception? Who wants to take that one?
I think they do, and I think I'd probably take it from the fact that there's now more dads coming up, and if I look at the kind of the paternity policies, 2 weeks off, like that's
It's not fair.
That's not fair for anybody. So there are new legislations that are coming in for guys to be able to spend more time at home, flexible working. But I think sometimes it's always been the onus that a woman takes off time and has a baby, but you've seen companies now starting to incorporate that you can share your kind of maternity time with your partners, and I think that's important. So there is times where we need to ensure that whilst we are trying this womanhood and sisterhood, that we don't leave the men out completely. They are a part of this. Their husbands, their partners supporting their wives or their partners within this role as well. So there is adverse effects there for them.
And it's thinking about, not just maternity, but just parental support, isn't it? And just ensuring there's that choice.
Flexible working hours and these are all things I think everyone can encompass from.
Yeah.
I think the fact is for stereotypes is that if you feel that you are not, that you go against a stereotype, I think it's your responsibility to be really vocal about that. I feel that as a woman, I feel that as a gay woman, I feel the responsibility to talk about it, because who knows who's looking, right? Or rather, everyone's looking.
Yeah.
As you move up through a business, you don't realise how visible you are, and you don't realise who's listening at any one time. So unfortunately, I think it's down to everybody, whether you're a man or a woman or whoever, to, if you feel that you're doing something that's against the grain, whether it's different working arrangements, whether it's, I don't know, interesting conversations with leadership about what you want, you've got to be really vocal about it, because that will help gradually change things.
And that requires bravery.
Yeah, it does.
To speak
It
up,
does.
yeah.
It does.
We've got another one here, which I think is good for you, Claire, actually. According to the World Economic Forum, it'll take over 250 years to close the gender pay gap. How do we close the gap quicker? Where are we going wrong?
So I think, funny if I heard a stat yesterday, it's 100 years in the UK. So maybe
UK's a little bit better
we're doing a lot better. So only 100 years, worry not.
We'll be dead.
Hope it happens after we're dead.
So I think it's a lot of those little things. It's a lot of giving confidence to women and anybody to have more open conversations. Really interesting about the Excel spreadsheets about sharing salaries. That's an interesting one. I wouldn't be surprised if that does come out into the fore. Again, probably by legislation, because I think that transparency would be explosive. I mean, really explosive. And I think that's not a bad thing. And I think insofar as the point about inclusion, we talk a lot about women with children. I say that again, but actually we really should just be talking about making life opportunistic for everybody. Everybody has different challenges, and you have no sense of what those challenges are. And single people don't have more time on their hands necessarily, because they're running marathons, I find, which I'll never do. But everybody has their own thing, and I think we make so many terrible assumptions. So I think if we can just get rid of assumptions and make sure, as leaders of business, we are making a great environment for everybody to be their best self. It's our collective responsibility to make everybody their best self. And so I think that's what will really drive things faster.
Yeah. Toccara, maybe this is one for you. Who is responsible for shifting perception in companies? Does that sit in HR?
Does it sit in HR? I think it sits with everyone, right? So it's not just up to one specific organization within the company to drive it. I would say anyone who is a part of a company should understand, right, how the overall philosophy of the business and how everyone is expected to be treated, and how inclusivity, if that's really something that's important to a business, well, it had better be very clear to all the employees, and that they understand how to drive it, how to follow it, how to own it, and how to be inclusive themselves. And then I would also say it is also very important for just the leaders of the business. So, a company can kind of say that they want to be inclusive, but if you kind of see it with the leaders of within your business units or kind of globally that isn't happening, well, then that's a very big signal to everyone else that they don't need to follow these rules. And so it is definitely up to the business to understand and outline what does inclusivity look like, how are we bringing these programs to our employees, and then it's up to employees to follow it. So, yeah.
Brilliant. We've got another question, which is, for companies that are going through an enormous amount of change and disruption right now, and with a lot of focus and pressure on budgets and resource, how can we make diversity a priority?
If I can step in, because you said, Jackie, earlier, it's a business issue.
Yeah.
And actually, there are stats, even if we don't feel it, there are stats to prove that diverse organisations do better. So if an organisation says, hey, I'm under pressure with my budget, then I would say be more diverse, because you will get better proposals, you'll get a broader range of proposals. A broader range of proposals means a broader set of opportunities, and you'll start delivering a better business. So I think it's a false economy to say, I can't spend time or money being diverse. Yeah. It's actually just a thing. So I mean, you can tell I feel quite passionately about it. It's just a bit of a crazy idea to think that it's a burden or a problem. Yeah. It's a brilliant solution.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately what you see is that the return you get on the time spent is far greater than the time spent kind of ensuring that you're being more diverse or being more inclusive or really focusing on that within businesses. And we talk about this a lot at Adobe, that it does actually show through in business results, right? We see increases in all of these various areas. And so is it just something that you're just not going to do because it's hard? Well, then it ultimately, you know, especially where we're at today with, you know, the fact that, you know, people have access to internet everywhere. Everything's very global, very borderless in a lot of ways. You are dealing with very diverse communities and very, I would say, educated consumers that have high expectations. And so they're not necessarily going to let any company off the hook for not being diverse. And they're, at the same time, going to have conversations for the companies that don't get it right. And those will ultimately impact your brand overall. So, yeah.
I think the thing is, if you have a more diverse representation at leadership level, a lot of those big decisions through change, disruption, are taken by leaders. You have a more diverse group there, then they're not thinking about this issue as something that is a choice or an option. And you also need to think, especially navigating through change, it is often those from underrepresented groups that are perhaps more disproportionately impacted by that change, right, for all sorts of reasons. So I think it's courageous leadership as well, actually.
Yeah. And I think just knowledge is power. So the more that you share knowledge, the more that you work with others who are different from you, you gain so much more. So I think that's really important.
It's just better. It's just the right thing to do. That's all we've got time for today, but just one last question, which I wanted to ask each of you. This year's theme is obviously Each for Equal. What does that mean for you, Jackie?
I'll keep it short, but I think I had to look, I thought about this, and for me it was three things that I want to see, and it's equal pay, and I think kind of equal existence. I think it's really important. That's probably my highest one in terms of equal existence. In order for us to get there, we need to see each other as equal, regardless of its pay, gender, race. Existence is going to be key to go forward. We are all human. We're all the same. We all bleed the same. So it's important that we see each other as equal.
Brilliant. Nina?
I think it's about really asking every one of us as women to think about what we can do in our organisations to keep this topic at the top of the agenda. And it's small things to calling out small behaviours when you see them, to big things like galvanising a group to celebrate International Women's Day or whatever it might be, to even policy change, whatever it is. I think we all think collectively as women, what can we do, and do it.
Clearly, gender today is more than men and women. There are a variety of genders. So actually, it's about individualism, but it's about a collective responsibility. So I guess in a kind of what I was saying earlier, it is our together responsibility. We all should ensure that each individual can be their best self. And that's what it's really about.
Amazing. Toccara, last but not least.
To echo off what all the ladies said, to me, what Each for Equal immediately said to me is that it's about bringing your authentic self to the table, feeling comfortable to do that, but also having the equal kind of opportunities and the ability to do so. And so. It felt like you said, an individual, but also a collective phrase that's using kind of the balance of the two, which I think is very important for women to remember in business.
An amazing note to end the session, and thank you so much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Thank you for your questions and your engagement. Do feel free to continue the conversation on our social channels using the OnBrand hashtag and Each for Equal hashtag. Do stay tuned. We've got Anna Moulton, Global HR Director, talking to Anne Sewell, the Chief People Officer in the UK, for a fireside chat at 12 p.m. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in and have a great day.